Hello and welcome to the Heat Check Podcast, the Miami Herald's Miami Heat Podcast. I'm David Wilson and I am joined, as always, on the other line by Anthony Chiang, our Heat beat writer here at the Herald. Anthony, what's going on?
I'm good, David. I don't know about the Heat, but I'm good. How are you?
Doing pretty well. It's been a strange start to the season. Obviously, last year they had the kind of their rocky patch toward the end of the year. This year they're getting it out of the way early. I guess is the optimistic way to spin it. 1-3. They will play again before this episode comes out on Wednesday night. We're recording this Tuesday afternoon, just because some timing stuff. You're not going on the trip. Barry Jackson's out there. I'm out of town this weekend. So knocking this out of the way early, but I feel like no matter kind of what happens Wednesday, we got a lot to talk about from these first four games. Last week we recorded right after the opener. Talked about some of the issues the Heat has. A lot of those issues still kind of persisted throughout the weekend. Namely on the offensive end. Scored 90 points last night against the Raptors, which is bad. What is is that when you're analyzing this first weekend of the season and obviously what went wrong, but also what the biggest concern is, or is it all for you about the offense right now?
I mean, the Heat have issues on both ends of the court, really.
Yeah.
But I think if I had to pick one, the biggest issue, I would still point to the offense because, it's overall the third worst offense in the NBA, which is not good. It's only been 4 games, but still not a good start. But it's also like just a trend for the past few years, right? Like,
right.
The defense, somehow, some way, Eric Spoelstra finds a way to make it work, and eventually they'll get it right and they'll figure it out. But offensively, like, part of the reason they were elite last season is because, they had an elite defense, top 5 defense, but they were basically flirting around bottom half of the top 10, right outside the top 10 in offense for most of the season. If they can't do that this year, and their defense takes a step back because, the loss of PJ Tucker, or you're playing more shooting lineups, and that's just the natural progression of playing those groupings. Like, you might not be a top 5 defense, but if they get a step back on defense and their offense also takes a step back and is now a below average or just average, that's a big difference. And so far, I think the hope was with, Tyler Hero in the starting lineup, playing more shooters off the bench, that the offense would be a little better this year. And again, 4 games, the Heat have played pretty good defenses. They played Boston, 2 games against Toronto, which is a lot of length, which usually gives the Heat some issues. But third worst offense, 20th ranked half-court offense. The 3-pointers are not going in at the usual rate that the Heat make them. The 3-point attempts are way down, which we talked about last week, I think, David. Like, that's a huge part of their offense, and so far, they have just not been getting enough up.
That's surprising when you talk about the way that the way that the lineups have changed from last year to this year.
And I want to make clear, like,
playing more Strus, Hero, and Robinson
and Duncan, that would right. But the three of the four games they've played so far have been against defenses that like to run teams off the 3-point line. Boston's known for that. Toronto's known for that, right? So some of this might just be based on opponent. That's why we have to continue monitoring it. But these are the 4 games we're evaluating, right? So those are the issues I'm seeing. And I think offensively still, like, that's the biggest concern because you're hoping it'd be better. And so far we haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, it's right. Like you said, it's the trade-off they were planning to make. And as we know, this is not the way Eric Spoelstra likes to play. So at least for the start of the year, this was the trade-off they were planning to make. And maybe they were going to shift things throughout, was sacrifice some defense for offense. That was the calculus, right? It's what they sort of had to do when they lost PJ Tucker and couldn't replace him. And right now the math just is not holding up. And part of it is, Jimmy Butler has been really good, I would say, through these first couple games. Hero, I'd say Duncan Robinson has been
decent,
mostly a positive, right?
Yeah.
Which, like,
Max Strus in a few games isn't pretty good. He's had a couple quiet ones.
Rough on Monday, but first couple games was good. Tyler Hero kind of doing what he does. I, we harped on him a lot last week, but Bam was not good on Monday. Kyle Lowry was not good again on Monday. If those two guys, like you said, I still have faith that this defense is going to be really good because Eric Spoelstra makes these defenses really good, and their two best players, obviously Bam is a defensive player of the year contender. And Jimmy Butler can lock in and play elite defense kind of when he's not going to do it every night and at the highest level all the time because of his age and the load that he bears on offense. But, kind of come crunch time in big games, he's going to lock up. And obviously all throughout the playoffs, he's going to do it. And then Kyle Lowry, obviously, he's just going to keep tailing off as a defender, but that's obviously a strength he has. But your best guys have to be better on offense. And a lot of it, I think, starts with Bam needs to be better as a scorer, obviously. And it's like the big talking point for years and years at this point. But the efficiency just hasn't been there either. We talked about it after night one where he had that, he was missing a lot of close shots, kind of felt like an outlier performance. But it's not like he's had, he hasn't had that. Like it's continued a little bit since then. It's not that was obviously that game is an outlier. He's not going to have a lot of games like that,
right?
But he's looked more like that, I guess, than he did in the preseason when we were all of a sudden like, oh, he's kind of figured it out.
Yeah, I mean, the hope was again this year that he would take another step forward and as an offensive player. And again, it's only been 4 games, so let's see how things progress.
Yeah.
But just early on, it hasn't obviously been what Bam expected. I'm sure he'll tell you that, averaging 13.8 points a game. I mean, he averaged 5 more points a game last year.
That's a lot.
That's not that he's probably not going to average 13.8 points a game. I'm sure he'll average close to like 19, 20 when it's all said and done. But still, like so far, 13.8 points a game on 45% shooting for a center who's still, getting most of his looks around the basket. That's just not good enough. And also just averaging 3.8 free throws a game.
Yeah.
The thought was he would maybe average 7 or 8 a game with the way he was playing in the preseason, and the way he's kind of been ticking up in that department each year of his career. He's just the offensive game hasn't been what anybody thought so far for him.
Yeah, you leave 5 points on the table. Every one of their games so far has been decided by less than 10 points. Like that's a big deal. Those are very valuable points.
Yeah, so obviously he needs Bam to be better offensively. Like he's taking 11 shots a game, which is lowest since his 3rd year in the league. 4 free throws a game, which is lowest since his 2nd year in the league. He's still not really taking any threes. They need him to be better. Bottom line. But this team has so many different issues that it's hard to pinpoint on one guy. And really, and we'll get into this, I'm sure shortly, but off the bench, their bench units have been pretty bad.
Yeah.
Max and Gabe have had their moments off the bench, and so have Duncan. But you could tell, just with the lineups they're throwing out there, they're trying to search for answers because there's bench lineups they're throwing out there that we have never seen before. Even last season, even with these guys on the roster, and even just the numbers, I'm looking at it right now. Without Bam on the court, the Heat are being outscored by 30 points per 100 possessions. Without Jimmy on the court, they're being outscored by 20 points per 100 possessions. And yes, the Heat are going to be worse without these two guys on the court. But part of the Heat's success, the last few years, have been that Dedmon has been able to help the Heat survive those minutes, right? They've actually been Dedmon minutes have actually been a positive the last few years.
Right. Yeah. I mean, last year the story coming into the year was this team has no depth, and then a week into the season, we're this team has way more. They might be the deepest team in the league, and that was a kind of a superpower they had last year.
Yeah, and so far, they just can't survive. Basically, when Bam goes off the court, that's when they lose the game. When he's in there, they're fine. But when he gets off the court, in 5 minutes, they were being outscored by 10 points, and it's a huge swing. So, yeah, and the easy thing is to point to Dwayne Dedmon as a problem, but has Dedmon been good? No, but I think it's all these lineups are just they don't seem like they have much chemistry. They're still trying to feel it out. And I've talked to some of the guys, and they're early on, it was Spoelstra tried Jimmy with 4 bench guys, which really wasn't the case last year. That was new. That didn't go well. So in the second game, they had Jimmy and Hero and 3 bench guys, and then that didn't go well. They're just trying different things each game to try to find something that sticks, and they really haven't found it yet.
Does that surprise you how much they're kind of struggling to figure out lineups, considering this team is essentially the same team they had last year?
Yes and no. I mean, yes, I think we thought continuity would be a big strength, and it hasn't been so far. But also no, because they have two of their best bench guys now in the starting lineup, so that
Right.
changes everything. Like Tyler Hero was the spark off the bench. Like you could put him with anybody and he would make it work. Right now, yeah, Tyler could play with some of the bench guys like back half of the first quarter if you leave him in there, but it's just not the same. Like he's already been in the game for 8 minutes, or maybe you're taking him out and you're putting other guys on the bench and on the court. Like it's just yes, it's the same guys, but the guys have different roles. There's different combinations just because new guys are in the starting lineup. So I would say yes and no because I could definitely see why they've struggled a little bit early on this year to find the right groupings because same faces but different roles within the rotation.
So how much, like, obviously the East is competitive, and
Yeah.
the you're losing games right now to some of the team. Three of the four losses are to the Celtics and the Raptors, who I think we think are teams in that Heat tier. Obviously split with the Raptors, so should I guess note that wasn't all bad against the Raptors necessarily. How big of a concern is a slope? Because now they go out west coast trips, never easy. How much of a concern is a slow start to the season?
I mean, it's concerning because you started with 4 straight home games, right? And the
Yeah,
team has
right.
basically
I think we're a little surprised that they're 1-3.
Yeah.
Even 2-2, I think would have felt a lot different and like more reasonable.
Yeah, and even Eric Spoelstra said it. Like he's like, I don't think anybody would have anticipated starting out with this home stretch that we would be 1-3. Like
Right.
they're surprised by it. Like nobody thought this. Yeah, it wasn't like they weren't easy games, right? Like the Bulls one was the easiest one. Obviously, they probably should have won that game. Boston's very, very good.
Yeah, I mean, this
team in the
they've
NBA.
kind of let a couple of these slip away. They were up in the second half against Chicago. They were up in the second half
Against Toronto. Yeah.
against Toronto on Monday. The Celtics, would they lose by like 6 points or something?
Yeah, it was close. It was a competitive game. They played actually well. That might be their best game of the year.
Like,
they lost. Yeah,
their best. Yeah, the best they've played probably. But they definitely kind of feel like they let at least I would say that Chicago and definitely Toronto on Monday felt like the games they let slip away.
Yeah, and it's a little bit, it's early, but it's concerning only because they're 4 home games. The team has been relatively healthy. I know you're missing Vic and Omer, but you have your best guys in the lineup, so that's not an excuse either. Like you don't know how many games that you'll have pretty much your entire starting lineup available, right? The Heat had that. Essentially this entire homestand other than Caleb getting suspended for 1 game. And 2, like the East is just very, very good. So what the record that might have gotten you a 3 seed before might not be good enough this year, and there's just not as many winnable like easy games in the East either. Like almost every team in the East is going to give you a competitive contest. So yeah, I don't think the Heat can't afford to start this season like 2-5 if they go 1-2 in this trip. Like, but they can ascend with the playoffs, obviously, but it's going to be an uphill battle just to get back into contention for like one of those top seeds in the East. At 2-5, like it's going to be difficult this year. The East is very, very competitive. We saw it on this homestand. Like even Chicago, they have DeMar DeRozan. Like that's not a gimme. And then they didn't have Zach LaVine that game. And then Boston is obviously really good. And then Toronto, they're in that tier 2 where they're fighting for, one of those top 4 spots, 5, 6. Like they're within that range. And even them, like just you can see the unique challenges they pose with their length and their athleticism. So I just think we got a little taste of like what it's going to be like this year on this homestand with so many competitive games against Eastern Conference opponents.
Mm-hmm. By the time you guys listen to this, they will have played at Portland, who has been kind of a surprise, pretty
4-0
year. Yeah. I think a lot of people thought they might be in the Victor sweepstakes. And then at Golden State on Thursday. So it is a tough little start to that West Coast trip. And even they wrap up in Sacramento. So who I think people expect to be maybe a play-in team. So it's not easy. It's you could easily come out of that, 1-6,
Two. Yeah.
2-5, and it looks pretty ugly. But let's spin this positive. What have you liked, I guess, from the first few games of this season? What are the positives? Or conversely, what do you not expect? Like what are you just chalking up to the small sample size of an early season? Give me either one.
I mean, I think
give people something to feel good about.
I think they'll make more threes. Like, how about that? Like, they're not going to shoot 33% on threes for the entire season, right? Like, they're too much. They have too many good shooters for that to happen. So that's one thing. And I do think, like, the offense wasn't good against Toronto on Monday. They scored 90 points, but some of that was like they were just missing some open.
Yeah,
shots.
I mean, Jimmy Butler after the game was like, I thought the offense was pretty good.
Yeah. I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, obviously I do, but they also miss a lot of shots.
Right.
So like when Max Strus goes 0 for 8, like what are you gonna do? Like he's gonna have those nights maybe a handful of times a season. So that was just one of those nights. And Kyle Lowry goes 1 for 6. He has not been shooting the ball well. Tyler Hero goes 2 for 9 from 3. Pretty much Jimmy was like one of the Heat's best 3-point shooters last night.
Yeah.
2 of 3 and Duncan 3 of 6
right off the bat, right?
Yeah. So I mean, I guess that would be the one thing I would point to, maybe, that like that will help lift some of the offensive numbers because eventually they'll start hitting those shots. But they got to generate more, and again, I don't know if it's the product of who the defenses they've been playing these first 4 games, since the sample size is so small, or what, but they're taking too many mid-range looks. I know they're never going to take they're never going to be a team that doesn't take mid-range shots because that's some of their
Jimmy
best players.
Game.
And Bam.
And Bam too. He likes that shot
too. But they're taking too many mid-range looks, too few threes. They're getting to the rim a decent amount, but they're not finishing well around the rim. So again, you would expect that to kind of get better, right? Over time, like they're not gonna. What do they shoot? They're shooting like, last I looked, like 50% at the rim or something like that, which is not good. Obviously, really no. They are shooting 58% at the rim, which is 26th in the NBA. 5th worst. So basically, 5th worst. That should improve, over time. So I think the offensive numbers will slowly start to improve over time. But their defense, like if their offense is just going to be average, which if that's the ceiling for this unit, their defense needs to be elite, just like it was last year.
Mm-hmm.
They need to be a top 5 to really have a chance to contend in the East.
Yeah.
And if they're going to take a step back on that end of the court too, it's going to be tough. It's going to be really tough to really make the numbers work.
Defense was good last night, though, we should say, on Monday.
It was really good last night, especially in the half court. The half court, they were like elite. Where they really got hurt.
Like their defensive performance on Monday is probably like the best like single thing they've done this year so far, right? Like
other than the first half performance offensively against Toronto on Saturday when they scored like 71 points.
Right.
But then
but over like a full game, like the way they played defense last night is probably the most encouraging, like full game, like we can build an identity around this thing that we've seen.
Yeah, and that's without Caleb, right?
Right, that's true. Yeah.
Who is one of their better defenders, and he's one of the most reliable defenders in the front court, which is saying, not really saying much with their depth on this roster, but defensively, like they were really good on Monday. They only really got hurt in transition. Raptors scored 27 points in the fast break. Like Raptors couldn't do anything in the half court, which is a good sign for Miami's defense. So that's a positive. But look, there really are things to be concerned about everywhere when you look at it, but it is a small sample. Like some of these numbers are going to get better just over time, naturally, like the three-point shooting around the rim, the defense, like they're not going to allow 27 fast break points every night. If they put together that half-court defensive performance in most games, they're going to win.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a bad start, especially with 4 straight home games, but this team is much better than it's played so far. I think that's the positive thing, right? We know what this team can do when they're firing all cylinders. Yes, they're missing PJ Tucker, but pretty much the entire roster's back. And I think you talk to all the guys, talked to Kyle Lowry last night, like he's like, yeah, we're running it back, but we're trying to figure it out. Like everything feels different. Like Tyler Hero's in the starting lineup. Caleb is a starter and he brings something different to that group. Bam is trying to be more aggressive. Like all that changes kind of the way that he plays a little bit. And Kyle Lowry, like I'm not giving him an excuse, but his usage rate last time it was this low was his rookie year in Memphis. Like he's been having to play off the ball so much
Mm-hmm.
for the lineups he's throwing out there that I don't know if it's maximizing his skill set. He's trying to figure it out. But you can just tell when you watch the game, like Kyle Lowry barely has the ball and he's the point guard. So yeah, they have some
And he's
things
not
to
shooting the three well enough right now to be
a force.
I think when they traded for him a couple years ago, we thought that was a nice little perk they had, was that he was
right.
a historically great 3-point shooter. Historically a great 3-point shooter. I don't want to say he's a historically great 3-point shooter, but and we saw that early last year. And again, just like since the injuries and the whatever the personal issues were that kept him away from the court, and it's just kind of like felt like he's just struggled to recapture what we saw early on. And again, it's the team changed a lot in that time, as you noted, which is probably creating some challenges.
Yeah, different roles. I think guys have the same guys, but different roles for a lot of the key guys because of the new kind of lineups, new rotation. That's forced some guys to adjust. And Kyle Lowry, like we've seen it when he was in Toronto, right? Like he'll have these games where he scores 4 points on 2 of 12 shooting and 1 of 8 shooting on threes. Like he's a guy that's gonna have those games once in a while. But it's just unfortunate for him in the Heat that he's had in the first 4 games, 2 of them have been that kind of game for him.
Yeah. Well, and we should say, as I kind of hinted at the top, the Heat did not have a lot of strife last year until the Jimmy Butler Spo altercation, I guess is what we'll call it. And I think one of the most impressive things about that Heat season was that they totally regrouped from that. I think a lot of people, like national media types, kind of wrote them off when that happened because it was in the middle. They were kind of they had their worst losing streak of the year at that point, and then that happened, and they just totally brushed it off and made the Eastern Conference Finals. So the one thing you don't question about this team is that like they can regroup from a slow start. I mean, we saw last year at the Celtics were below 500 at the midway mark of the season. Now, obviously, that doesn't happen every year, but like we're 4 games in, 5 by the time you guys listen to this. There might be 2 and 3 by the time you guys listen to this, and I think people will feel a lot better. But it's they've earned the benefit of the doubt. This group, I think.
Yeah, they built some equity, and yeah, last season was totally different. They started 6-1.
Right.
Like there was.
And then even when COVID happened and they were rotating guys that we'd never heard of, they still cruised.
They still found a way to win, and they had built enough cushion to like really survive those stretches. That's I think the concern, right? Like again, like you don't know how many games this year you're gonna have all 5 starters available, and for you to waste 4 home games while you're relatively healthy.
There was like a really long.
That's not good.
Last year, what was it like? It was probably when did Bam get hurt? It was kind of close to this.
It was like beginning of November, I think.
Beginning of November. It was not far off.
And then Jimmy hurt his tailbone.
And then they didn't. They didn't have the 5 starters together. I think for like
a couple months.
2 months, 3 months. Yeah.
Like you just don't know when that stretch is gonna happen, and you got to make the most of the games you do have those guys available. And through the first 4, they obviously have not. So to me, that's concerning, even though it's only a 4-game stretch. But you just really, and especially in the competitive beats like this, you can't afford to waste those little stretches in the year.
One other, you mentioned the stat that this team, Bam's kind of expectations are high for Bam, right? He catches some flack.
Yeah, deservedly so. He's a max player, even though
definitely. Yeah. The numbers though that you mentioned with the Heat, the on-off numbers. What do you make of those?
I think obviously they're a better team with Bam on the court, even though offensively he has not been great this year. Like just defensively, like their defense is a lot better when he's anchoring it. And B, I think the bench, like they really haven't found, like we talked about, like they really haven't found lineups that work yet with that unit. So they need to, obviously, sooner rather than later. But yeah, I think it's a combination of those 2 things. And then also like Dedmon hasn't been as good as he was last year. Like that's just plain and simple. I mean, he's had a shaky start to the year. Defensively, the Heat defensively, like the biggest like difference with Bam on the court and off the court, when you look at the like deeper at the numbers, is defense. They're allowing like 130 points per 100 possessions without Bam on the floor. Like that's obviously terrible. So I think you shouldn't blame like just Dedmon for it because
right,
he just is the backup center. But he's been the one on the court when Bam hasn't been. So he is part of the reason why they've struggled during those stretches.
It's the opportunity now for Yurt, probably, right? In the way we
Yeah,
haven't seen in the last couple.
And I don't know.
We thought he was maybe going to be the backup center last year and never materialized.
Yeah. And obviously people will listen to this after that Portland game, but Yurt is on this trip on the West Coast. Right. So that's a good sign that he's at least close. Victor is not on the trip. So you would think he's going to miss these next 3 games at least. But yeah, I don't know what issue, how many of the, the issues that we were seeing with Alabama on the court, how many what does Yurt-7 solve? Defensively,
that's he flips it, right? With him. You get more offense.
Yeah, more offense. Yeah. So we'll see. I mean, this could be Yurt-7's opportunity if he's able to, play and is healthy. He might give him a look because they're just searching for anything that could work right now off the bench.
All right, what do we want to wrap up with? You look at the ESPN Future Power Rankings?
No.
Heat 7th?
Future? Like what? In what sense? Future?
I don't know. They do some like formula. How are the next 3 seasons?
Oh.
What else do we miss?
I didn't really miss anything.
I know.
We can pretty close. I feel we can close out pretty quickly.
I'm just thinking one topic.
Yeah.
And then finish.
Do we think that maybe there'll be a change to the rotation or like Jovic?
Oh yeah, let's do that. Let's do that
really quickly. I mean, there's not much to say there, but yeah.
Yeah. All right. 2. So the big kind of underlying topic that has undergirded everything we've talked about here is the difference of the different looking rotation. And obviously, like you said, when they lost PJ Tucker, it was going to have to change in some capacity. Obviously that meant Caleb goes, someone has to go in. Caleb was the guy. The bigger change that they made was Tyler Hero going into the starting lineup. We mentioned obviously Yurt coming back soon. Victor Oladipo, who knows, but doesn't sound like it's going to be like a half the season injury, but you never know. He's obviously a guy who has a long injury history at this point. We saw Jamal Cain active last night for the first time. Obviously, like we said, they're tinkering with the rotations and the lineups. Is there anything that, I don't know, do you think there could be a change coming at some point? And how, I don't know, would they ever at some point, if this gets to, like we said, 1-6 or something, Tyler Hero back to the bench? Would that be a possibility? What are your kind of thoughts on what Spo might be thinking and when you have to make a change? Because again, we're only 4 games in. We don't want to too much.
Yeah, it's early. But yeah, I don't at this point, man. I know they did this a few years ago with Tyler Hero where he started the season as a starter and then they moved him back to a bench role. I don't know if he could do that again in his 4th NBA season after he's pushed so hard to be a starter. Yeah. Like, what message are you? I know that team success is the bigger, most important thing overall, but what message are you sending the guy after you just sent him to a huge extension, and you're sending him back to the bench? And I don't think he's really been the issue of like for this team. Like he's played fairly well offensively.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't want to say him, but yeah, no, I don't see that one. But I think like. I think Omar Yurt-7, like that's a realistic possibility. Like giving him some minutes to see what he can do off the bench. Jamal Cain, he played really well in the preseason, and I'm sure there'll be spots for him during the year, but I just don't ever see him being consistent contributor this season at least. Nikola Jovic, I know there was some question about him maybe getting some playing time in the rotation because he was so impressive in the preseason, but as you could see, like the coaching staff still obviously feels like he needs time to develop, grow into his body, be able to defend at the NBA level. Like they obviously don't feel like super comfortable with him right now because if not, he would have played. I mean, God knows they're looking for something that works off the bench. So the fact that he hasn't played is, I guess, in that sense, like says something. So I don't really expect big changes. I think if anything, it's Omar Yurt-7 when he's healthy that he'll get some time to see if he could help the Heat survive those minutes without Bam on the court. And then when Victor comes back, like, I mean, that was like a big one, right? Like he was supposed to be like a swing player for the Heat this year, like a healthy Victor Oladipo, in a
Yeah.
6-man role, anchoring the bench unit, playing as like the Tyler hero of this year's team, and he hasn't been
I can't
available.
remember. Did I pick him to win 6-man of the year? I don't remember if that was my bold prediction.
I don't think you picked him, but you said like you were thinking about it.
I was looking at the odds. We definitely pulled
Yeah.
up the odds.
Yeah, you were thinking about it. And like that's just not. I mean, not having Victor available and like his uncertain future because of the, this latest knee issue. Like, yeah, that's one of the most
The other
concerning
knee, I should
things
say.
right now.
It's
With the other
not the
knee,
same. Yeah.
with the other knee, but Eric Spoelstra didn't mention like it's probably due to some overcompensation over the years,
Mm-hmm.
because he had been playing for so long on the knee
Right.
without it being right before he had the second surgery. And even last year, like I'm sure it wasn't as strong as he needed it to be while he was playing during that playoff run. Like some of it seems to be from overcompensation. So it is concerning. And yeah, if you want me to pick one of the most concerning things from this team, like along with the offense, I would say Victor Oladipo, because he was going to be an important part of this team's success, and he hasn't been available yet. It looks like he's going to miss the road trip, so he'll miss the first 7 games at least of the season, and we really don't know when he'll be back. And without him, they're lacking like that scorer, facilitator, guy who can anchor a bench unit, and I think that's part of the reason why the Heat have really not been good without their starters in the court.
Last one, can Caleb Martin moonlight as an outside linebacker for the Miami Hurricanes? Got some eligibility left.
He could teach them some form, I think. Yeah.
I know. They got to bring him in for like sometimes like they'll bring in like baseball players to teach quarterbacks how to slide.
How to slide,
I remember that was a big thing with RG3. Like they had to bring in like a national to like teach him how to slide. They got to the Canes got to do that with Caleb.
Yeah. No, that was like, I know everyone gets like in the heat of the moment in competition, like that stuff happens. But to see Caleb like afterward, like talking to him about the whole thing, he felt so bad about it. Like so bad. Like you could just tell, and even like watching the whole thing back, he tackles Koloko into the seats and everyone comes rushing over, and you see Caleb under the pile, like looking around like, what did I just do with his hands up like this? Like just realize like in a moment of rage. Yeah. Like he like didn't know he was a rookie. He really didn't know much about him. It wasn't like anything that guy did. It was just like a culmination of like getting elbowed in the head like a few times during the game, and then that guy like I guess swiped at his back while he was falling down, and it just like set Caleb over the edge. But he felt so bad about it. So it wasn't the biggest thing in the world. Like obviously he didn't commit a crime, but like he really was remorseful about the whole thing, which was cool to see. Obviously he owned up for his actions and took accountability.
Yeah, and Jovic gets his first NBA suspension out of the way
without ever playing a minute. I wonder if that's ever happened before. Like, has that ever happened?
The guy gets suspended before he plays an NBA minute?
Before he plays an NBA second.
Yeah. I don't know. It sounds like a question for our friend Tim Reynolds to figure out for us.
I tried to figure it out. I couldn't find anybody, but I just couldn't. I got bored. And I'm not going to continue this search.
Yeah. Can you search that on StatHead? Like, was there a thing you had to, a combination of inputs you could use, or
I had to go kind of like player by player, but like different all the ejections from each year, and I won like a couple years, and I was just like, I just can't.
It's gonna take you
forever. I don't have time for this. I have a 2-month-old at home. I just can't. I can't do this.
Yeah, let's get Elias, the Elias guys on this for us.
But it has to be very rare, obviously.
I would assume so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So. And
by the way, I wonder if like maybe some guys have gotten like PED suspensions or whatever right before they like ever play the game. I bet that's probably happened. Like substance, like I don't know, or like like a domestic abuse or something, right? Like like an off the court reason, but for an on the court action, I can't imagine it's happened very often.
Yeah, and I spoke to Jovic about it too, and he was kind of funny. He was 19-year-old like Serbian, coming from Europe.
He just got thrown off the bench. Was that what the ejection was?
Yeah, like he just like got it happened right in front of the Heat's bench.
Right, exactly. That's why I was surprised.
He didn't like enter it. He was just trying to like pull people off. Like he didn't even try. Like he was trying to, but he didn't even get to that because like coaches pulled him away as quickly as possible. But I spoke to him. He's like, "Yeah, I really didn't know the rule. Like I didn't know. Like he's like, I was just trying to help my friend." Which is funny. I was just trying to help my friend. It happened right in front of me. Like that was my instinct. Like I was just trying to get people off of him. But now that won't happen again because now I know the rule, So
Yeah, there you go.
he obviously didn't like it wasn't like he got into the fight and like started punching guys. Like he was just like he
Right.
just
Yeah.
got up
No,
to
I
his
know.
chair
That's
and
why
walked
I was surprised
3
when I saw
steps.
he was suspended. I figured it was
Yeah,
like the you can't come off the bench rule.
yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
pretty much.
that's what a welcome to the NBA moment for Nikola Jovic without ever playing a second.
Incredible, incredible. And he got. I mean, it was suspension without pay, so he lost a game check, which
Yeah.
thanks for him.
All right. Let's finish things up there. You can follow Anthony on Twitter at Anthony_Chang. He is not on this Heat road trip, but obviously we'll be paying attention to what goes on out on the West Coast. I'm excited to
I'm not
watch.
gonna watch any of these games. I'm not gonna watch any of these games. I'm off.
You actually might not, right? You got a 2-month-old.
That's true.
They're late night games.
I'll watch them the next morning when I wake up.
Right. Or when you get woken up at
3 a.m.
1 a.m. and you catch the last 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I didn't think about that. These games are really late for me right now with everything going on. We'll see. We'll see if I can watch them.
Then we can Heat Warriors will be fun.
Yeah, it's just like I feel like the Heat every year play the Warriors in San Francisco on the second night of a back-to-back. It feels like.
Yeah,
It's
I feel
the
like
same thing this time.
Last year was it right after
2 years ago?
Was last year? It wasn't like right after the Jokic game last year. I feel like they were on a back-to-back that night, but I don't remember if they went to Golden State. The Jokic Morris.
No, after the Jokic Morris, they went to LA, and it was a back-to-back in LA.
Oh, and it was back-to-back in.
Right. But last year there was a second night of back-to-back in Golden State. I think after Portland, so same thing as this year. And the year before, I think it was a back-to-back. I think you covered. The listeners don't care about this, but I think you covered the Heat Warriors game off TV
remotely during the COVID year.
2 years ago. They like had just played Portland, I think, again as well, or I don't know, but I think you covered like 2 years ago. It just feels like every year they play Golden State on a second night of a back-to-back, and it's like almost a scheduled loss. It happens again this year. I just want to see these two teams play each other like on even ground and see them face off. But
you can follow me on Twitter at DB Wilson too. I'm out of town this weekend, which is good because it means I don't have to watch the Hurricanes, which is my usual Saturday beat at the Herald. Pretty dark right there right now.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about that right now at this moment. That's not a fun topic for me. But yeah, that's been. It's been. I obviously I didn't know. I knew they weren't going to win a national championship this season, but like totally disappointing with how they started this year. Like to lose to Middle Tennessee State, lose to Duke in the fashion they did. They have more talent than this, so it is.
I was also fortunate to not be at the Duke game because I was down at Homestead for the NASCAR race with Udonis Haslem.
I saw that.
You just showed up.
You're just finding ways to avoid the Hurricane games.
I know.
Like NASCAR weddings.
Yeah, I was surprised Haslem had never been down to the track.
Really?
Considering he said it was his first time.
Wow.
I mean, it's usually the races during NBA season, so obviously the schedule has to sync up right. But still a little surprised for like a Miami guy.
Right.
To never make it down there. But he was pretty entertaining. Talked about Talladega Nights.
That's cool. UD's the best. He's always entertaining. Like, I'm gonna miss him next year when he's not on the team.
Well, he'll be around, I'm sure.
Yeah, gracing us with his presence.
Yeah,
and with his hope of becoming an owner. So we'll see if that happens.
Right, exactly. All right. Thanks as always for listening, and we will talk to you guys next week.